CD Denjin, Rockabilly Paradise. That's a name. This is a game I am really excited to talk about because, well, first of all, it's a game on a console I actually have zero experience or really any knowledge of. This is the first bit of PC Engine anything I can show off, and I don't really have any perspective on this console. I mean, it's a running joke that I'm not going to get rid of because I like my dumb running jokes, that I don't even think the TurboGrafx exists in the West because I've never seen one. I don't think I know anyone who has seen one. But I fell into a PC Engine Duo R for super cheap, and JetWolf was nice enough to actually hook me up with a game for it because games on this cost a fortune. Feel free to hit up the Patreon so that I can check out more of this stuff because seriously, this stuff is unbelievably expensive. But it's a very cool console and I'm genuinely quite interested in it. But this is also a game that interests me because I was completely surprised by it when I actually got into it. Super Air Zonk, aside from sounding like it should be on the Super Nintendo and not the PC Engine CD, I thought was going to be one of those games that is a CD version of an existing cartridge-based game, because there was an original Air Zonk as well. And that's actually not the case. I did a bit of digging before I played this, and instead of the cartridge game with CD audio, it's actually a totally full-blown sequel. And that blew me away kind of instantly because I didn't know what to expect from this at this point. If you're not familiar with Zonk, it was kind of a weird sequel series spin-off to Bonk, who was in and of himself the mascot of the PC Engine. And this is his great something grandson from the future who looks more or less exactly like him, but he's rocking Kamina shades. Oh yeah, and also he's basically Astro Boy. The plot to Super Air Zonk is pretty simple. One fine day, suddenly weird alien invaders, quite possibly from space, arrived, sending all manner of odd creature and monster down to take over the Erath, and also erect this weird parody of the Statue of Liberty that's also an alien lizard, whose logo seems to be a poop. Also, this alien leader guy, he's got drip. Though weirdly enough, the statue that they bring up comes with the existing green oxidized copper patina. That's not how that works, and I'm starting to question the factual accuracy of this historical documentary. That's really all you got, and it's up to the punkic cyborg himself, Zonk, to save the day. Because Granddad died, well, with him being a caveman and stuff, and now we're in the future. Hey, I just got it. Maybe Bonk's bones have congealed into oil that is currently fueling Zonk, and that is their actual familial connection, and how a robot could have a caveman ancestor. It makes total sense. You know what? We are back on the scientific train. It checks out. The story to this game is very simple, very silly, and, you know, it's a horizontally scrolling shooter, so there's not going to be a ton of it. It's really just, there's bad guys, go fight them. Oh, and everything looks weird and silly, and there is frequent poop all over the game for some reason. The game itself is fairly simple and straightforward, although it is kind of interesting that before the game even starts, you get to select your stage. For the first 4 of this game's 7 stages, you can select the order you play them in, and that's really cool. And anytime you can give the player a sense of choice and give them an extra customizable experience, that's always a plus for me. It adds just a little bit of replayability because honestly, this game doesn't have a ton. It's a very straightforward game. Once you get into gameplay itself, it's a left to right horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up. You've got your character, you've got enemies, shoot them, don't die. It's actually really easy to not die in this game. It is functionally one of the easiest shmups I think I've played in years. Case in point, I think the one time I actually game overed in this game, I was trying to just to get footage for the ending of this video. So yeah, I think this would be a great game to get beginners into. It's incredibly approachable just in a sense of how easy it is to actually get into it. Unfortunately, it's incredibly unapproachable because it's on a somewhat obscure system whose games cost an absolute fortune. So unfortunately, it's also very hard to recommend. That said, it is a fun time. Every single stage has its own surprises to meet you. Like when you go to the water stage, suddenly there's like huge waves that will knock you back, and you have to kind of account for that. Or there's one stage where, for a very brief time scrolling vertically, so you can get into an underground segment. And the fact that this is a horizontally scrolling shooter that also scrolls vertically, that's actually pretty technically impressive. I haven't seen too many games do that. In fact, the only other one off the top of my head that has done both at the same time that I can think of is the Famicom Doraemon game, which is not as good as this. That game is pretty rough. But it is kind of cool to see a game that's all about scrolling horizontally, then suddenly for like 2 seconds switch to vertical just so that it throws a new wrench into your plans. In terms of power-ups, there aren't too many. You can find meat that allows you to upgrade your basic attacks, and as you take damage it will downgrade them, so you want to try and keep Zonk fed as well as you possibly can. There's a power-up that will shrink you, which just gives you a little bit more room to dodge everything, and considering how big your sprite is at times, having the shrunken sprite feature is definitely a plus. Although weirdly enough, if you're already shrunk and you grab the shrinking power-up, it returns you the same size. Saying that out loud, that makes a lot of sense, you know. You grab a thing that shrinks you, you grab it again, it makes you big, but there's no reason to ever be big again. So the fact that that's a feature is just kind of quizzical. If you're shrunk, you can take alternate shrunken routes through things as well as dodge things a lot easier, so that makes a lot of sense, but if you're big, you just limit your options. I'm not sure why that wouldn't just give you extra points instead of just reversing the objectively beneficial power-up of being shrunk. It's a very strange choice. The main power-up of this game, however, is kind of bespoke to each and every level, and this is really cool. As you play, you will find a local inhabitant of the area being harassed by the alien invaders from space / dinosaurs or whatever they are, and if you help them out, it's not hard, you have to kill one enemy, they'll join you, and if they join you, they fuse with you. I'm not sure how that works. And then you're suddenly a sushi chef version of Zonk, or a Rockstar version of Zonk, or Space Battleship Zonk motto. Yeah, this game is kind of neat like that. Interestingly enough, while these transformations do change how your shots work, and they're objectively better because of it, they're bigger, they have extra effects, they're just in general better. If you press the other button on your controller, you can then eject your buddy and he'll just turn into an option that sort of flies around, and I think they give like a very weak shot that they shoot for you. This was a feature I found zero use for in the game, so you probably won't be seeing too much footage, but you can give yourself options, kinda. But that's kind of it for power-ups, aside from the bespoke power-up of each stage turning you into a different form of Zonk with a specialized attack type, general attack power-ups that make your attacks a little bit better, and the baby bottle that shrinks you. There's not really much else in order to make your progress smoother or faster or be able to decimate your enemies that much better. It's kind of a shame that you don't have more options in that regard. And the fact that there isn't really at any point a moment where you need to make decisions about what you want, because the baby bottle is always going to make things better. The meat will always upgrade you until you're at your max, at which point I think it's just points, and then your buddy is always just objectively making your shots better, so there's not really a reason to ever not select these, and there's nothing to really compete with them to make you have to think a little bit more about how you want to fly through each stage. It's a little disappointing in that regard, because the game itself then suddenly becomes a lot more mindless in how it's approached, and its lack of difficulty does not help this. And this game does like to give out extra lives like candy. There should be zero shmup ever where I have 9 lives, unless I use some kind of code. But I frequently just had way too many lives to actually feel threatened in this game. It's a very chill experience because of it, however. It just feels like a kind of a fun, goofy, relaxing good time, and part of that's just because of its presentation and its tone, but also it's just the fact that there really isn't anything all that threatening in this game, which is kind of a shame because if you're looking for a challenge or more replayability, you don't really have it here. I managed to beat this game in one sitting, and it only took me maybe an hour, if that. The enemies, like the stages themselves, are fairly varied and change with every single stage, and that's a good feeling. It does help mix everything up and make every challenge a little bit different. There was one stage, I believe it was the one that does have the vertical scrolling out of nowhere, that suddenly just has pretty much an entire stage as a singular enemy. And while this is hardly anything new, there are tons of shoot-em-ups out there that will make one giant enemy be like the entire stage. It was kind of neat to slowly dismantle this thing and then fight it as a boss. I think this game did that sort of giant enemy as a stage concept very, very well. The only real issue that comes to mind about the stage designs themselves is that in one of the last stages of the game, it's kind of a maze, and some of these mazes just have dead ends that you can't see, so you have to like take damage to phase through the walls, and I feel like that's not fair. You know, there's moments where you just can't see the end of those walls, and you don't know if it's a dead end, you just have to blindly guess and hope. And sure, you might just take one of your many lives to get through it, but sometimes you might get stuck in a little area that's trapped between a series of walls, and then you'll have to do it again and again, and it's just dumb and it feels cheap. But that one stage is really the only point where I felt like stage design was really a problem. There was, however, one bit that did actually feel like it required a little bit of thought. It was an area where you had to attack blocks, and these blocks had like little LEDs to indicate where they would go once you shot them. So they'd like fire off into one direction, clearing a path, and it was sort of like a puzzle. That was kind of cool, but given this is a game with rapid fire shooting, there's a very good chance that they'll also be flung back directly at you the moment you shoot them a second time, which, with rapid fire, is pretty much every time. That's not a great idea, but I do appreciate that they were at least trying to make the gameplay a little bit more complex, because this game needs that complexity, and it just doesn't have it elsewhere. In terms of gameplay, Super Air Zonk is a fairly mindless experience, and it's incredibly easy. In that regard, it's pretty easy to recommend if you've never played these games before. Again, if we can get past the fact it's on a console that's unbelievably expensive, but for hardcore veterans, it's going to be really simple, and it's going to be one of those games you play once or twice and then probably forget about it entirely. And that's kind of a shame. But when you're in that moment and you actually just get to experience this game, it is a silly, goofy, good time, and honestly, that's what you go into Bonk games for. It's a slightly different flavor of it, and it's not one that lasts too long, but in terms of gameplay, I think this one did a lot really, really well. The overall presentation to Super Air Zonk is excellent. Visually, everything is bright and colorful. Every stage looks unique with its own enemies and transformations and themes, obstacles. It works really, really well. I like that every single transformation completely changes your shot types to look a little bit more visually interesting. In your standard form, you just kind of have like different flavors of lightning gun, but as like the sushi chef, you've got like sushi being thrown out at like a broad spread. As the Rockstar, you've got awkward music notes because you can't sing to save your life. As the space battleship Zonk motto, you fire out your face as a laser, which is kind of fun. I really do enjoy just how creative every single power-up affected your shot types. That was very, very cool, and it was unique to every stage too. The enemies are very creative, and every single boss looks a little bit different and has their own sort of thing going on. Audio-wise, well, like a new Gundam, that subtitle of Rockabilly Paradise isn't just for show. The soundtrack in this, well, everything else about this game is certainly high quality and fun. I think truly the one thing about this game that hits it out of the park and is incredibly memorable is the soundtrack. There was one stage, I believe it was the beach area, that starts off really, really chill and nice, and by the end it sounds like something out of Sonic Adventure. The final main stage of the game, I'm not gonna lie, I had to stop and pause the game so that I could air guitar for about 5 minutes because it just rocked that hard. Tell me you can't just stop and air guitar to this. Can't do it. It's too damn good. Like, the music to this game absolutely is amazing, and while the rest of the game is certainly good, the music is just absolutely stellar. Heck, there's even vocal tracks in this game, which is pretty cool. Seriously, the music must have been one of the most important things in developing this game. I mean, it's called Rockabilly Paradise, right? They must have known that the soundtrack was what was going to ultimately be the defining signature of this game. When Jetwolf sent this to me, he told me he bought this because it came with a soundtrack CD, and he bought it with the express purpose of just getting the soundtrack CD because he didn't have any way to play this game. And I believe it, because that soundtrack is amazing. In the end, this game has an incredible presentation, and it's certainly a great starting point for the PC Engine CD. If this is what this console can do, I'm excited to see what else it can. Now, if you want a copy of Super Air Zonk on the Turbo CD, cheapest and currently only copy I can see on eBay is $3,500. So let's just not go with that and pick one of the Japanese copies, yeah? I'm gonna look up the Japanese name. Did I mention these games are expensive and I'd like support so that I can keep playing stuff? Because, dear lord, this stuff is insane. Yeah, so if you're okay with playing the Japanese version, which is what I'm doing here, you can get a brand new copy for about $100. Now, there's a caveat to that being that this is one of the, like, professional grade replicas that are out there, because this console, again, is incredibly expensive, and people just decided, hey, let's do professional grade replicas and try and make a decent chunk of money off that too. But $100 is substantially cheaper than the alternative, if you don't mind it being in Japanese. And there aren't a lot of things that would make it all that different if you played it in English. I also have to give a huge shout out and thank you to Jetwolf for sending me his copy, because I actually had this console for a couple of months and I just had nothing to play on it. I didn't even know if the console worked because I couldn't test it. So this was a great way to test my console. It was a great intro to the ecosystem that is the TurboGrafx, and honestly it makes me more and more excited to try more CD games because they seem so cool, and honestly the CD stuff is what drew me to this console to begin with. Super Air Zonk, CD Denjin, whatever you want to call it, I think it's a very flawed experience. If you were to compare this, if you took one of the mainstream Bonk games for a moment, I think that's sort of like the equivalent of a proper full course meal. By the time you're done, you are full, you are satisfied, couldn't eat another bite, and you had a great time with it. This game, to me, comparatively feels like a bag of potato chips. You eat that bag of potato chips, you're still hungry by the end, you want more, and 2 seconds later you'll forget you even did it because that's kind of how forgettable and empty it ultimately was. It's not satisfying, and I think that lack of satisfaction comes from the fact it is so easy and there's no challenge to it, but also there's no thought process in playing it. It feels very mindless as you go through because you have very little power-ups, you have very little alternating routes that you can go through every single stage, and there's no point where you need to really think about the order of operations by which you're doing things. There's no point where you need to make a critical thought in order to make the best choice for you because every power-up is just objectively better, and have power-up is always better than don't have power-up. That's about the extent of thinking that you need to make in this game. And I think it's without that challenge and that creation of player choice that ultimately weighs this game down as being forgettable. You'll play this game once, you'll have a fun time, you'll rock out to the music because it's great music, but you'll probably never go back to it, and it's honestly something you'll probably forget you ever did in the first place. The Super Air Zonk CD Denjin is a really fun game. It looks great, it plays great, but it ultimately feels like a very hollow experience.
Bonk.